Good evening and welcome to Light Code Portal. I'm Tanya with the Dean of Education for Light Language University, and I'm here with Anna Noyes, founder of Light Language University and Circle Insights. Tonight's topic is going to be sacred geometry. Um, Sacred geometry is all around us, and we see it in everything. And before we begin, I would like to point out the Light Language University's logo. The triangle represents the mind, body, and spirit. The circles represent the dimensions and us being multidimensional beings. The golden phoenix, move out of the way here, represents the human being rising up from the ashes of the old Piscean age into the new age of the Aquarius. And the small triangle represents the shift that is happening on the planet where we are all ascending into the consciousness of the heart chakra of love of the Aquarian age and out of the solar plexus that rules the Piscean age. All right, with starting out, Anna, how are you tonight?
I am good. And I'm so glad you started off with explaining the logo for Light Language University because I have to explain, of course, the logo because you see over here on the wrong side
Right.
that I also have sacred geometry behind me. And you're right, it's everywhere. And what I have represented is the seed of life. And the seed of life is because we are seed planters and we're planting seeds. And then the Merkaba is inside the center, and the Merkaba is the chariot of the soul. So we're planting seeds for the chariot, for the soul to go global and to help people so that they can step into their power and understand everything like the spirit anatomy and how they connect. So I'm really excited to start with that. Thank you.
Great. Absolutely. All right, first let's start with the basics. What is sacred geometry?
Ah, well, I just taught one of these workshops a couple of weeks ago, and it was our first workshop, and it was amazing because everything is sacred geometry. Everything that you see around you, and especially we see it a lot in architecture, but we see it in nature all around us. You see spirals, you see squares and triangles and different shapes that represent different things as we build. And so I think what's very interesting about it is too that it's also frequencies, and we'll talk a little bit more about frequencies tonight and how consciousness builds things through those frequencies.
Hmm,
So yes, sacred geometry is really it's also, oh, I have to say this, it's also a language, and I don't think a lot of people realize that it's a language. If I'm working in the Akashic records, sometimes people will come and I will see these images of these beautiful shapes and these beings, and they're not like what we're used to, but they're geometrical designs or geometrical, I guess, shapes.
shapes.
So patterns, shapes and patterns. That's the word I'm looking for. And so my Siamese has decided to join us.
Excellent. Okay, so I've heard the terms that there are both male and female shapes in sacred geometry. What does that mean?
Well, it's very easy actually to define. If you think of, and I always like, if you think of female, we kind of have curves. So in sacred geometry, the way they set it up is that curves represent the female, the feminine aspects of sacred geometry. And then you have the straight lines. And if you think about, I used to be a designer at one time. And so we would draw men, with straighter lines, women with the curves, and work with those patterns. So straight lines are masculine, and the feminine are, of course, are the circles, or all the curves. But yes, another way to, to work with that.
Yes, and we know females definitely have curves.
Yes.
uh, what can sacred geometry be used for?
Uh, well, sacred geometry, of course, we use it a lot in architecture. We've also used it in designs. We use it for even when we're designing something or putting something on a plate, uh, arranging food. We might put it in a design or arrange things. We're always thinking, and I don't think we really realize it, but we're always thinking in those terms of how do we create things with these geometrical patterns of
Hmm.
circles and straight lines. Yeah.
See, for me, geometry, when I hear the word geometry, it always takes me back to high school, and that was my worst subject. So
I have to say, I hear you on that. What's funny
my
is
brain just
my
shuts down. It's like, oh
we're gonna have to do math, but what's really unique about the way that we work with sacred geometry, and I'm glad you said that, is we don't necessarily work with the mathematics. We work with certain forms, like Metatron's cube, or the flower of life, or the seed of life that we talked about, or the dodecahedron. We're using different shapes that come in that we work with energetically to create things and to form formulas to help people. So yeah, it's a little different than having to figure out the exact measurements.
no. So, what would you say is the most sacred geometrical shape?
Ah, well, that would be the Star of David as we know it, or the Merkaba that we know it. And so it's considered again, it's considered the chariot of the soul. And it's famous. The other one is the dodecahedron, which is the one out of the five platonic solids that I'll talk about later. But the dodecahedron was so sacred that if you even uttered the name, they would kill you. So nobody wanted
Oh,
to utter the name. It's pretty, pretty, yeah, anyway, but the not pretty actually, but the dodecahedron is actually the furthest. So we know we talk about light language, and if we think about our aura, and 30% of us are in the physical body, and the other 70% is outside of the body. Well, the dodecahedron actually resides at the very tip. If you can see my fingers, if I were to stretch up my hand, the very end, and it's the most ethereal part of the human spirit or the human soul. So it was considered very sacred.
all right. So, sacred geometry's origins are traced back to 2000 BCE and 1001 BCE in Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures. Sorry, many teachings have described sacred geometry as the blueprint of creation and the genesis, the origin of all forms. What is the spiritual meaning of sacred geometry?
So you have to think basic. So if we were to take a speaker and we put a pie plate on top of it and put some grains of sand and we turn the speaker up, different frequencies create different shapes of sacred geometry in the form of circles and straight lines. And what's exciting is what we've discovered is that those straight lines and the way that they're created. So let's talk about the dodecahedron, the way it's put together. And the way the lines are create a certain frequencies. Or if you were to take the tetrahedron, then that creates another frequency. And these create sounds, which is vibration. And I think that in its essence, that when you put these shapes together, whether they're very tiny or they're huge, what we're realizing that if we step into consciousness, so we have those four levels of consciousness, which we're always connected to, and we always talk about the person, it's the individual, which knowing about the self, it's the group consciousness, which is the people around us and the people that we are connected to. It's the collective consciousness, which is every human being on the planet and their consciousness. And of course, God, creator, is one that holds it together. So all four layers of consciousness actually thought has frequency. And when thought has frequency, that creates vibration or movement. And when vibration or movement is created, it creates, just like the pie plate sitting on that speaker, creates sacred geometrical patterns, which is how, if you think about it, consciousness, thought, movement, and sound are the arrangements of the building blocks of the atoms. So we go back to that part where the collective mind is what thinks and creates things in the physical form, because we all agree that this is a bottle of water. And if this is a bottle of water, and we all agree, but if we changed our mind and it was a bird, it'd fly off. because the thought creates that vibration, like the pie plate, which creates the movement of the atoms that creates the physical existence. I just think it's so exciting.
Well, it's very interesting that you said that because I remember not so long ago I actually saw a video. It was I think on YouTube that a man was doing that very thing. He had a big metal plate that he had sand on, and then he would play. It was like a Tibetan bowl, but larger, much larger, and flat. And he would take and play the sides and do different vibrational frequencies along the sides of it, and based
Yes.
on that, the sand would move and change into different shapes and so forth. And it just makes you think about that. If the frequency is doing that to the sand particles, then what are sound frequencies doing to us on a cellular level?
Beautiful, yes. And if you know the frequencies, if you go back to Qigong, so I studied medical Qigong for a little bit. And if you study the Qigong, each of the organs, each of everything has sound and vibration. So if you know which of those frequencies create what sacred geometrical patterns, you can actually use those, which is the same thing of sound and because it rearranges the structures of the
Right.
atomic structures of the body and changes for healthy reasons. Or it could go the opposite. So sometimes you listen to something and it doesn't resonate, you don't feel good. And that's because it doesn't, resonate with you. But other times you can go in and it can shift. So sound is very important.
I agree. All right. It is said in some cultures that the complete flower of life is made up of 61 circles. But the golden beings have explained something different in their explanation of the flower of life. How many circles does the flower of life have?
Well, in Light Language 101, what we do is we take the flower of life. And the 61 circles, if you take, there's two circles that go around. And I make, I want to call it the Velopalooza, but I always mispronounce it. So I hate to say that. But anyway, if you take those off and you continue to draw circles, you can go forever on those circles. And each one of those circles, because it's circle upon circle, it starts with a dot and then it draws a circle. And then from there, you draw another circle. And then you just continue drawing circles. And eventually, you come with this beautiful flower of life. And each one of the spaces in between, I had Spirit one time come out and explain to me. I was doing a meditation, and actually, everybody was meditating, and they had the flower of life up on the screen. And as I'm looking at the flower of life, I realized that it was moving toward me, almost like coming out energetically toward me. And then I heard the golden beings describe, and they said, Anna, they said, pay attention to those spaces because each one of those spaces represents a dimension. And each one of those dimensions are unlimited. And each human being that comes into the earth plane is born into the earth plane. Our fingerprints are so different of our energy signatures. And we actually match different parts of those dimensions. So we come in as unique as our fingerprint. So we may have some dimensions that we shared and some experiences that we shared. But if we live for eons in that flower of life as example, we call it the soul map, then there may be some dimensions that I haven't explored or some you haven't explored that I have or for others. So it's kind of interesting. So we do teach that in Light Language 101. It's a fun exercise that we do, and we kind of color in these different, you've done it, but you color in the different spaces. And what's funny is some people will have triangles, other people will have S's, other people will have lines, or it's really everybody's unique and exciting.
Yes. All right. So tell me, how is sacred geometry used with healing?
Ah, Well, again, I think I kind of explained a little earlier. I kind of jumped the gun, but explained a little earlier. But it is really amazing because it does help rearrange the atoms in the body and it helps transform the aura. And it's a language. Again, we're learning that light language isn't just light, it's sound, frequency, vibration, everything coming together, sacred geometry that creates the physical as well as the etherical. So even though we can't see the etherical, it's still, their atoms still moving, the energy's still moving, the light's still moving out here, and it's also changing frequencies here. And also, if you work with some of those tools that you said, example the the bowl, the crystal bowls, or the regular bowls, or tuning forks, and you use them out here in the etheric, it shifts energy. And sometimes what we find is that we can see things, illnesses, before it actually hits the physical body because it has to come from out here and it travels through the etheric fields before it enters into the physical body. So yes, we can use sacred geometry through sound and frequencies. And again, we teach that. We have sacred geometry and light codes. And the light codes are different types of sacred geometry that you can meditate or think about or use different ways to shift things in your body, just like sound.
Okay. And so we did talk a little bit about music and sacred geometry and the frequency. So, can you explain a little bit about the Visica
Pisces.
Pisces? Is that
Yes,
Pisces? Okay.
yes, the viscous. So it's circle and then two circles put together. So if I draw a circle and then I draw another circle, it's two circles overlapping. And so what you have is you have like an oval in the center. And so that's kind of the birth of creation. It's the birth of everything. It's the way spirit moves and the way spirit creates more. And that's the beginning. The first is the dot, consciousness of the creator. And then the second is creation of movement. And then it creates the Visica Pisces, which is the overlapping of two circles. So,
Okay. All right. So, the law of octaves in the periodic table was discovered by chemist John Newlands in 1865. This was prior to Medieval, yet Medieval got the credit. But in the 1980s, Professor Moon at the University in Chicago demonstrated that everything in the physical world is based on these five forms. So let's talk about these five forms and elements.
so there are five. If you were to draw a circle and have the, after you go past the flower of life, then you go into and you create Metatron's crew, Metatron's cube. I can't say it. Metatron's cube out of these circles of 13 circles is the base. And then you were to add the different lines, what you come together. And the circles that is the base is called the fruit of life. And then you add these straight lines and you were to connect the centers of all of this with the masculine. So you have the feminine on the bottom, and then you have the masculine on top. And what's interesting is that they found that there were five platonic, we call them the platonic solids that you just talked about. And everything on the periodic table is actually created by these different platonic solids. So we have the cube, which is represented by the earth or the root chakra. It's for grounding. It has 6 identical square faces and 8 vortex corners. We have the tetrahedron, which is represents fire. So they all have elements of the elements, the 5 elements. It's the solar plexus. It's 4 equal triangles and 6 vortex corners. Then the dodecahedron, which I explained earlier about, is ether, which opens up the Akashic records, the spirit, and the throat chakra. It has 12 pentagonal faces, and it's for higher knowledge. Oh, and the tetrahedron is to stabilize things. You can use it for stabilizing. The isohedron is water. It's sacral. It's for emotional, and it has 20 triangular faces, 12 vortices, and it unblocks creativity and balances emotions. And then you have the octahedron, which is air, and that's the heart. And it's about intelligence. It helps us forgive and helps us with communication. It has 8 faces, 12 edges, and 6 vortices. But I just want to mention something else. When you go around to the sacred sites on the earth, a lot of the people who the masters who built the sacred sites, the pyramids, and some of the temples, the Greek and the temples that are around all over the world, they understood that these beautiful shapes created certain frequencies when put together by the curves and the straight lines. And they understood that the vibrational frequencies, when the person walked into a building, those frequencies made vibrations that shifted the physiology of the human being. So if it was a place of worship and they created it with certain sacred geometry forms and patterns, you would go in and it would help you raise your frequencies or step into so that you can step into power or step into a place where you could go in and do your worshiping. Or if it was a place for communication or connecting or releasing, I mean, all of these things were created for so they understood the ancients, and they did that, like you said, for thousands of years. They've known about it. So sacred geometry has been around for such a long time, not only in our buildings, but again, it's in the universe. The spiral we use a lot. We use that a lot in a lot of our workshops and classes, but it's also represented. You see it in the stars. You see it up, in the as planets and how everything circles around. It's the golden mean. We understand how to calm energies down or how to raise frequencies up by using the spiral. Or so, and you see it in shells, and you see it in different things. It's just a beautiful language. But again, it is a language, and it's a wonderful thing. And light codes, when we're working with the geometrical designs, we're encoding the frequencies just like the buildings do in the light codes of the etheric temple of us, which helps to shift and create things in the physical temple of the physical body of us. So it's a beautiful process and language of understanding. Anyway, thank you for letting me share.
Oh, thank you so much. This is a very interesting subject, and I'm glad that we could bring this to the public tonight and educate them a little bit about the subject. Thank you so much. All right, I do want to mention a few things. We do have a spirit rescue workshop coming up this weekend, November the 6th through the 7th. The following weekend, we have our herbal essence workshop on November the 13th and 14th. Then on the 20th and 21st, we have a Light Language 101. So, for all those lovely people who want to take the upper level courses but haven't signed up, please sign up for 101. We have a new to this class that is coming up on November the 10th at 7 o'clock. And then our next Light Code portal will be on November the 24th, and we will be talking about herbal essences. So, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and please join us again on 11/24 for when we discuss herbal essence. Thank you so much, and good night.
Good night.